Hi, I'm Joe from Imperial College London, and I'll be presenting our work, iSDF, Real-Time Neural Sign Distance Fields of Robot Perception. In this work, we're tackling the problem of reconstructing sign distance fields in real time. We show the inputs here on the left, the depth and pose of a camera moving live in an environment. And on the right, we show the output, the reconstruction of the sign distance field. This reconstruction is produced by training a neural network in a continual learning manner. First, we're going to show some slices of the ground truth sign distance field for the environment. The sign distance field maps x, y, z coordinates to the distance to the closest surface to that point. Here we show positive values of the sign distance outside of objects in green and blue, and we show negative sign distances inside objects in purple and pink. Here we're visualizing level sets of the sign distance field. Note that the zero level set encodes the surface geometry of the environment. Sign distance fields are commonly used in robotics for navigation and manipulation for motion planning. The reason for this is that it's very easy to transform a sign distance field into a collision cost field simply by applying something like the hinge cost as shown there. Although truncated sign distance fields are commonly used in SLAM systems such as Connect Fusion, it's very challenging to reconstruct full non-truncated sign distance fields because simply applying depth fusion results in large errors away from surfaces. Other related work, such as DeepSDF, tackles reconstructing objects using sign distance fields. However, these kind of works aren't real-time. In iSDF, we tackle the problem of reconstructing full sign distance fields for large scenes in real time. The most notable related prior work is VoxBlocks, which is a method based on voxel grids that reconstructs the sign distance field in a two-stage approach, first reconstructing the surface, and then doing an expensive wavefront propagation algorithm to compute the sign distances in all cells. In contrast, iSDF is quite different and operates by training a neural network in real time. This gives iSDF a number of positive properties compared to VoxBlocks. We'll show these by looking at the reconstructed surface for both of the methods side by side. The first key property is that iSDF is predictive. By this, we mean it could sensibly fill in partially observed regions, for example, completing the backside of this beanbag. Also, iSDF can denoise many noisy measurements, producing a smooth reconstruction of this wall. A second key property is that it's efficient. It can adaptively model different parts of the scene with different levels of detail, allowing it to reconstruct small objects such as this lamp accurately. It's also important to note that iSDF is only using 2 megabytes of memory here in the network weights, whereas VoxBlocks uses tens of megabytes to store the voxel grid. Here I'll briefly explain the supervision method we use to train iSDF. First of all, we select a bunch of keyframes from our keyframe set using active sampling. And then we backproject rays using random pixels within keyframes. The network is then queried at points sampled along these rays, and we compute a loss using a bound on the sign distance. The simplest bound we could use is the distance along the ray to the surface. However, this is a weak bound, and we instead choose to use the closest surface point in the batch to provide a bound. This is a much tighter bound and results in much stronger supervision for the network. We're now going to focus in on a single ray and look at how this bound is computed. Here we show the vectors going from each of the points along the ray to the closest surface point in the batch. These vectors can also be used to supervise the spatial gradient of the predicted sign distance. Lastly, we're going to show some qualitative reconstruction results for one scannet sequence and one replica CAD sequence. On the top on the left, we show the ground truth mesh, and below that, the reconstructed surface. On the right, we have two slices, a slice of the ground truth sign distance field, and below, a slice of the predicted sign distance field. We can see that the final reconstruction of the mesh is watertight and accurate geometrically. While the second reconstruction is playing, I want to highlight some other quantitative results that we found. We compared iSDF to both VoxBlocks and another method that runs on a GPU and is similar to Connect Fusion, and found that iSDF produces more accurate sign distance fields and also spatial gradient of the sign distance field, which is of course crucial for trajectory optimization. Lastly, we're also going to have a live demo running at the poster session later on, so if you're interested, I'd really encourage you to come by and check it out. Also, our code is open sourced, so if you do want to run this on your robot in your lab, I'd really encourage you to do so. Yeah, that's all for me, and looking forward to meeting people at the poster session later.
Yes, go ahead.
This question is for the iSDF paper. Do you know how we might model other attributes? Currently you do depth reconstruction, but if you needed texture, color, or other stuff, is there a way of doing this straightforward manner?
Yeah, it would be very straightforward to make the network multimodal. So yeah, currently it's just predicting a signed distance value, but you could easily add color. In fact, we did experiment with this, but kind of found it simpler to just stick with depth in this case. And yeah, you could trivially add color, then you need to have some kind of render loss and training, or you could add other scene properties into the network by just adding multiple heads to the network to output these different properties.
Cool, thanks.
It's also for iSDF paper. Do you need a very accurate camera poses? If yes, how do you get the accurate camera poses?
Yeah, so in our experiments, we do assume that we know the poses. So we did some experiments on a synthetic data set when we had poses available, and we also used a ScanNet data set for the other ones, which also provides poses. Yeah, it would be quite simple to add some pose optimization into the system and kind of have some bundle adjustment going on instead of just the mapping. There's some choices about what loss you would use to refine the pose. We did experiment with just using the same loss that we're using to train the signed distance field to optimize the pose, but that didn't work super well, and so I think that some kind of loss based on a render of the depth would be a sensible way to do it. And we have looked into that, and that's something we're continuing to work on.
Okay, thank you.
Question for iSDF. Do you think that method can be used for recognizing terrains and uneven surfaces?
Sorry, recognizing what?
Terrains, different uneven surfaces like rocks and stones, and I'm thinking of legged robots locomotion, basically.
Yeah, sure. I guess iSDF is reconstructing a 3D map, and so yeah, you can easily do things like extract the normals in the surface, or kind of convert that into a mesh, and then you could do some kind of recognition based on the mesh. Or you could do some kind of semantic labeling. As I was saying, you could easily add heads to this network to have a multimodal predictions, and so you could add like a semantic head to this network, and in fact that's been done in lots of related work before.
Thank you.
I'm actually another question for iSDF. Yeah, sorry. I was wondering, the network, is it pre-trained at all? And if it isn't, how do you think it's completing the backsides of objects? What biases is it able to learn to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's trained completely from scratch. We randomly initialize the network at the start of each run. Obviously, this isn't the optimal thing to do because we have no prior information about the scene. But yeah, so the way it can complete the backside of objects is that, so when it's reconstructing the parts of the scene that it can see, it's learning some kind of feature set that is kind of used to reconstruct, and then it's kind of repeating these features in the unobserved regions to sensibly fill in like a self-supervised way.
Thank you.
Great. I think that's all we have time for now, but feel free to ask more questions at the poster session. Let's thank the speakers one more time.